No one stopped for the woman at the last table. Not at first. They came through the county fair with coins in their pockets and children pulling at their sleeves, and still they passed her as if the far end of the row had been built for forgetting. Abigail Mercer kept her hands folded over her apron and counted the cracked blue plate in front of her instead of counting the faces turning away. On that plate sat 12 buttermilk cakes brushed with sage honey. By noon, 11 were still there. The 12th was in the hand of a rancher no one in Larkspur Crossing expected to see buying sweets from a widow whose lunchroom had failed. Elias Voss took one bite, looked down at the cake as if it had answered a question he had carried for years, and said, "Ma'am, wrap up the table." Abigail thought she had misunderstood him, but he put a $5 bill beside the plate and said it again, all of it. And in the hot dust of a Montana harvest fair, with half the town suddenly remembering she existed, the widow at the last table felt the first warm breath of an ember she had believed was dead. It was August of 1891, and Abigail had been awake since a little after 2. The room behind her rented cabin was hardly a kitchen. It had a stove with one temperamental leg, a warped shelf that leaned no matter how she braced it, and a window that rattled whenever the wind came down from the north. Still, before sunrise, it smelled like butter, yeast, apples, and the sharp green sweetness of sage honey. She had baked because that was what she knew how to do when fear had no other place to go. 8 oat loaves, 2 dozen buttermilk cakes, a stack of rye crackers for men who claimed they did not care for anything sweet, and 1 small jar of apple butter she almost left behind because a foolish part of her believed that if nobody bought the cakes, nobody would want the apple butter either. She packed it anyway. A person could lose a husband. A person could lose a business. A person could even lose the habit of expecting kindness. But Abigail Mercer had not yet lost the discipline of finishing a thing properly. At 6:30, she loaded her borrowed cart and led the mule toward the fairgrounds east of town. Larkspur Crossing was already waking. Doors opened. Boys ran errands. Women shook dust from porch rugs. Men in good hats started toward the fair with the satisfaction of people who expected the day to have room for them. Abigail did not begrudge them that. She only wondered what it might feel like. Her assigned stall was at the far bend of the vendor row. Past the tinsmith, past the saddle soap man, past the empty patch where someone had decided not to bother showing up. It was the kind of place a committee gave to a person they wanted present enough to seem charitable, but hidden enough not to matter. She set out her goods without complaint. A little sign, lettered by her own hand, read, "Mercer Baked Goods." She placed the cracked blue plate in the center, because it had been Daniel's mother's plate, and because the blue made the honey cakes look golden. Daniel had been gone 3 years and 9 months. For a long time, Abigail had measured life by that absence. "7 weeks since she had slept through the night. 6 months since she had locked the door of their little lunchroom for the last time and sold the tables for less than they were worth. Eventually, the counting became another form of injury, so she stopped doing it aloud. Her town did not forget her tragedy. That would have been merciful. Instead, it remembered it in the particular way small towns remember misfortune, politely, repeatedly, and from a safe distance. By 8 o'clock, the row was crowded. People bought leather reins. They bought licorice sticks. They bought fried potatoes in paper cones badly made and overpriced. Children pointed at Abigail's plum pies, and mothers pulled them toward livelier stalls. Men glanced at the sign, then looked past it as though baked goods became invisible when sold by the wrong woman. She sold 1 rye loaf to a freight driver who never looked up from counting his change. 25 cents. The flour alone had cost nearly that. Near 10, 2 women paused close enough for Abigail to hear and far enough to pretend they had not meant her to. "That's Daniel Mercer's widow." "The one who tried to keep the lunchroom?" "Tried is the word." A soft laugh. Then a sigh sharpened to sound like pity. Poor thing. Abigail moved the apple butter jar half an inch to the right. She had learned that the hands must be given work when the heart is tempted to answer. At noon, the heat deepened. Dust lifted under boots and wagon wheels. The crowd flowed around the bend in the row and thinned before it reached her table. Her cheeks hurt from keeping a pleasant face. Her feet ached. Her money box held less than $1. She began to consider packing early. Then the crowd made room for a man in a dark hat. Elias Voss was not famous exactly, but his name carried weight the way a loaded wagon carries weight quietly, and with no need to announce itself. Hollow Creek Ranch lay 9 miles west, a hard piece of country with good water, and enough cattle to make town merchants lower their voices when Voss entered a room. He had broad shoulders, weathered skin, and the stillness of a man who had spent too much of his life making decisions under weather that did not care what he wanted. He did not look at the fare. He looked through it. And then he stopped at Abigail's table. His gaze went first to the goods, not to the gossip around her, not to the shape of her body, not to the plainness of her dress, not to the widow's black ribbon she had finally stopped wearing, but still felt at her throat. He studied the blue plate. "What are those?" he asked. "Buttermilk cakes," Abigail said. "Sage honey on top. How much?" 2 cents each. He laid down the coins, picked up one cake, and took a bite before moving away. No one did that. People bought and carried food off, as if eating beside the person who made it would put both parties in an awkward debt. Elias stood there in the open and chewed slowly. Something changed in his face. It was not surprise exactly. It was recognition. "What did you put in this?" he asked. "Buttermilk, a little cornmeal, butter if I can get it, sage honey, pinch of salt, and the honey from Mrs. Bellamy's hives by the creek." He nodded once, as if she had confirmed a suspicion. "How early did you make them?" "Before light." He looked at her then. Really looked. "This tastes like somebody remembered what food is for." The fare did not stop, but the air around Abigail's table tightened. She could feel heads turning. People who had not spent 2 seconds considering her table now seemed deeply invested in what the owner of Hollow Creek Ranch might buy from it. Abigail had not received a compliment without a hook in it for so long that she distrusted the first clean sound of one. "Thank you," she said. Elias looked over the table. The oat loaves, the hand pies, the crackers, the jar of apple butter, the honey cakes on Daniel's mother's cracked blue plate. "You make all this yourself?" "Yes. You bake every day? When I have the supplies?" "That is a poor arrangement. I did not design it." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "No, ma'am, I expect you did not." He took a bill from his coat and laid it beside the blue plate. "Wrap up the table." Abigail stared at the money. "Mr. Voss, that is too much." "For what?" "For all of it." "I am not buying all of it because I am hungry." He glanced once toward the people now watching too openly. "I am buying it because it should not be sitting here ignored." It was the first time that day anyone had spoken of the insult as if the insult belonged to the room and not to her. She did the arithmetic. Goods, supplies, time, hope, embarrassment, the long walk here, the longer walk home if nothing sold. "It comes to $4.30, she said. "Then keep the rest for string." A foolish answer rose in her throat. Pride had always been quick to stand up, even when it was starving. But she looked at the table. She looked at the crowd. She looked at the $5 bill. Then she wrapped the goods. Elias carried half of them himself. He did not ask a boy to do it, did not make a spectacle, did not comment on the eyes following them. Abigail walked beside him toward his wagon with her empty basket under one arm and the strange, almost frightening sensation that the ground had shifted without asking her permission. At the wagon, he set the boxes down carefully. "I have 14 men at Hollow Creek," he said. "My cook left in June. Since then, supper has mostly been punishment with gravy." Despite herself, Abigail almost laughed. "I need someone who can run a kitchen without being told where to set the spoons," he continued. "Fair wages, a room in the house, full command over the kitchen, no other expectation." There it was, the offer. Abigail studied his face. She had lived long enough to know that help was often a coat thrown over a hook. But Elias Voss stood with his hands visible and his eyes level. He looked like a man who had said exactly as much as he meant to say. "People will make a meal of it," she said. "They already made a meal of you this morning." That was true enough to sting. He did not soften it. "Let them talk about wages next. I will think on it. I will be at the feed office tomorrow until noon," he said. "After that, Hollow Creek." He climbed onto the wagon seat. Then he looked back at the empty table at the end of the row. "Next time, they should put you where people can see what they have been missing." He drove away with her oat loaves, her hand pies, her rye crackers, her honey cakes, and the apple butter she had nearly left behind. Abigail stood in the fair dust with $5 folded in her palm and felt something inside her chest shift, not opening, not yet, but no longer sealed. The next morning, she went to the feed office. By the morning after that, she was on the road west to Hollow Creek. She took 2 trunks, 3 recipe books, the cracked blue plate wrapped in a towel, and Daniel's old kitchen knife, because it had a good weight and remembered her hand. Hollow Creek Ranch was larger than she expected and rougher than she feared. The house sat low against the wind. Corrals stretched behind it. Smoke leaned sideways from the kitchen chimney. Men looked up from work when she arrived and then looked away too quickly, as if uncertain whether a widow with trunks was an emergency or a rumor. Elias met her at the steps. "Mrs. Mercer." "Mr. Voss." He lifted the heaviest trunk without ceremony. The kitchen nearly changed her mind. Not because it was dirty, though it was. Not because the shelves were bare, though they were. But because the room had the feel of a place where no one had expected anything good from it for a long while. A blackened stew pot sat on the stove. Flour had been stored too close to onions. The dish towels were stiff enough to stand accused. The oven door sagged on one hinge. There was salt in 3 places and sugar in none. Abigail set down her recipe books. "I will need inventory soap, 2 new towels, a proper flour bin, and no man in this room unless he has washed his hands." Elias looked at her for a long second. Then he said, "Yes, ma'am." By noon, she had found beans, carrots, a smoked ham bone, potatoes, cornmeal, and a basket of bruised apples no one had bothered to use. By supper, the men of Hollow Creek sat before ham bean soup, skillet bread, fried apples, and coffee that no longer tasted as if it had been strained through a boot. The first Cowan to speak was Rafe Mullen, a narrow-eyed man in his late 20s who wore suspicion like a second shirt. "This bread got sugar in it. A spoonful. I knew it. Does that trouble you?" He took another bite. "No." The older man beside him, Amos, closed his eyes while chewing. "My Mary made apples like this," he said. Abigail paused with the coffee pot in her hand. "Did she?" He nodded once. "On Sundays, when there was money for butter." Then she had sense. Amos looked down quickly, and Abigail understood that grief had come to the table but did not want to be introduced. She moved on. Within 2 weeks, Hollow Creek changed, not in any loud way. Ranches did not become gentle places because one woman made soup. Men still came in tired, irritable, sunburned, and smelling of horse. Fences still broke. Weather still threatened. Cattle still found stupid ways to die, but supper became an hour instead of a refueling. Coffee was hot when the men came in cold. Biscuits appeared before tempers had time to sharpen. The table learned their names back. Abigail did not mother them. She did not flutter. She gave orders, remembered preferences, and noticed what people tried to hide. Rafe hated carrots but would eat them if chopped small enough. Milo, the youngest hand, missed his sisters and tried to cover it by talking too much. Amos took his coffee plain because Mary had once said sugar made his hands shake, and 12 years after her burial he still obeyed her. Elias came late more often than not. He served himself, thanked her every time, and never once acted as if the kitchen was beneath the rest of the ranch. He replaced the oven hinge before she asked twice. He sent to town for the flour bin. He read every supply list as if it were a ranch ledger because, to him, it was. A month in, a freight driver stopped to water his team and left having paid for supper. 2 weeks after that, a pair of cattle buyers asked whether Hollow Creek took boarders for a night. By October, men took the West Road with strangely flexible excuses and left praising the table. Money began appearing in a cigar box Elias placed on the pantry shelf. Meal money, he told Abigail. Yours after supplies. It is your house. It is your food. It is your roof. It is your customers returning because they were fed by your hands. She looked at the cigar box, then at him. You argue like a man who expects to win. I argue like a man who has counted correctly. That winter, Hollow Creek became known for its table. And that was when Silas Crane noticed. Crane owned the town hotel, the mercantile, and enough of the county board to make decent men careful around him. Years before, when Daniel was alive and the Mercer's lunchroom had begun filling at noon, Silas had discovered concerns. Concerns about permits. Concerns about cleanliness. Concerns about whether a widow and her husband were undercutting legitimate businesses by charging fair prices. After Daniel died, the concerns multiplied, the inspections came. Then rumors. Then creditors who had never hurried before suddenly needed payment by Friday. By the time every accusation proved hollow, Abigail's tables were sold. Her stove was gone, and Silas Crane's hotel dining room was full again. She had not spoken his name at Hollow Creek. She did not need to. When Elias found her kneading dough harder than the dough deserved, he said, Crane sent a letter. She did not ask how bad. Elias laid it on the table. The language was polished. The meaning was plain. Unlicensed public meal service. Improper boarding activity. Possible moral disorder on a ranch where travelers gathered and a widow resided. Abigail read the letter once. Then she folded it. He prefers paper before he sends people, she said. You know his habits. I paid for knowing them. Elias's expression did not change, but something in the room sharpened. He will not take this kitchen from you. She looked at him. You cannot know that. I know what is mine to defend. This is my fight. This is my ranch, my house, my account book, my men, my guests. His voice stayed quiet. He aimed at you because he thinks you are easier to bruise. He will find the wall is wider than he planned. Abigail wanted to reject the comfort, not because she did not want it, but because wanting comfort made a person visible. Instead, she said, he makes fights expensive. So do I. 3 days later, a county investigator arrived with a satchel, a sour face, and questions he had arranged before entering the kitchen. Abigail answered all of them. She had kept every scrap because poverty teaches accounting with a hard hand. Elias stood by the back door and said nothing. His silence did more work than another man's speech. The formal hearing was set for the first Thursday in November. Crane expected Abigail to come frightened and alone. She came with records, Elias, a lawyer from Helena, 14 ranch hands in clean shirts, 3 freight drivers, 2 cattle buyers, Mrs. Bellamy from the Creek Hives, and Amos carrying the cracked blue plate wrapped in cloth, because he said evidence ought to include the beginning. The county room was full before the clerk called order. Silas Crane sat near the front looking almost sorrowful, which was the face he used when preparing to hurt someone in public. His lawyer spoke first. He made Abigail sound like a danger wrapped in an apron. He spoke of order, reputation, public safety, and the importance of proper channels. Then Elias's lawyer stood and removed the floorboard from under every accusation. Permits filed, fees paid, receipts ordered, no liquor, no boarding without registration, no unpaid tax, no complaint from a single paying guest except the complaint Silas had written himself. The commissioner shifted in his chair. Silas stopped looking sorrowful. Then Abigail stood. She had notes in her pocket, but she did not use them. For 3 years, she said, I let other people explain my life in rooms where I was not invited. I let men with cleaner coats tell this county what kind of woman I was, because I believed that if I answered, I would only give them more noise to use against me. Her voice did not shake, not once. I ran a lunchroom with my husband. After he died, Mr. Crane used complaints to drain that business until nothing was left to defend. Every charge failed. The damage did not. That is a useful trick. A lie does not have to win if it can keep the truth busy long enough. Someone in the back murmured. She kept going. I cook at Hollow Creek Ranch. I keep records. I pay fees. I feed working men, travelers, widows, and anyone else who arrives hungry and pays fairly. There is nothing disorderly in a clean table. There is nothing immoral in bread. There is nothing unlawful in a woman earning money where a man failed to frighten her out of earning it. The room went silent enough for the stove in the hall to tick. Abigail placed the cracked blue plate on the table. This plate held the first cakes Mr. Voss bought from me when the town walked past. It is cracked, but it holds. I understand that better now than I did then. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Mrs. Bellamy began to clap. Amos followed. Outside, Rafe stood beside the courthouse steps with his hat in both hands. We would have come sooner, he said. But nobody told us we were allowed to stand behind you. Abigail looked at the line of men from Hollow Creek, at Amos holding the blue plate like a holy object, at Milo blinking too fast and pretending the wind was to blame. You are allowed, she said. After that day, everything grew, not quickly. Good things rarely do. They rose the way bread rises, quietly. From work no one sees. Women began coming to Hollow Creek, a widowed mother who sold preserves from her back porch and could not get shelf space in Crane's store, a girl of 17 who could bone a fish faster than most men could saddle a horse, a former hotel cook Silas had dismissed for being past her useful years, though she could season soup by scent alone. Abigail listened. She made coffee. She asked what they knew and what they wanted to know. By January, she had 3 pages of plans. By February, she had prices for lumber. By March, she placed the pages before Elias after supper. A dining house, she said. Not charity, Paid work, proper service. Women trained in a kitchen no one can take from them because we will own the records before anyone questions them. Elias read every page. Name, Mercer and Voss. He looked up. My name first, she said. Of course. No argument, no pause, no amused indulgence. Just agreement, immediate and solid. Love, for Abigail, did not return like a trumpet. It came like heat through a wall. First noticed, then trusted, then impossible to deny. He asked her opinion on a grazing contract and took it. He mended the handle of Daniel's knife without asking whether he had the right, because he knew better and brought it back sharper than before. One night, he told her about a brother he had not written to in 8 years, and when she said, "Then write first," he did. In April she burned 2 fingers on a sheet pan and swore under her breath. Elias crossed the kitchen before she reached the pump. I am fine. You are blistering. I have blistered before. For a moment, the kitchen narrowed to his palm under hers and the steadiness of his thumb near the burn. Elias, she said. He looked up. I came here for wages. I know. I stayed for the work. I know. I do not think that is the only reason anymore. He held her gaze with the patience that had unsettled her from the first day. The day I bought your table, he said. I told myself I was hiring a cook. And were you? No. His voice was low. I was trying to keep something rare from being wasted. I did not yet have the right to say that, so I bought cakes and offered wages and waited to see whether time would give me the right. She laughed once softly because tears were too large for the room. We are not graceful people. No, he said, but we are accurate. He wrapped her fingers with salve and clean linen. Neither of them spoke of marriage that night. They did not need to rush a thing that had already crossed the room and taken its place. He asked her in June, sitting at the same table where she had shown him the dining house plans. I want the rest of my years to include you, he said. Not because you need saving, not because the ranch runs better with you here, though it does, not because the town will understand it, because the town is slow and often wrong. I want to marry you because the house is different when you leave a room, and I am tired of pretending I do not notice. Abigail looked at the man who had seen a real smile under exhaustion, who had not mistaken her cracks for emptiness, who had given her room to stand until standing became natural again. Yes, she said. He breathed out like a man released from a winter he had not named. They were married before the dining house opened. The ceremony was small, though the ranch hands made it loud. Rafe said, finally too close to the preacher, and had to cough his way out of the word. Milo cried openly and claimed smoke from the stove had followed him into church. Amos carried the blue plate to the supper afterward and set it in the middle of the table. In July, Mercer and Voss Eating House opened on the West Road. By 10 in the morning, every chair was filled. By noon, there was a line outside. By sundown, the women Abigail had hired were moving through the kitchen with flour on their sleeves, and their heads held higher than when they arrived. Hattie managed the pies. Lenora handled the accounts with a severity that frightened late payers into honesty. Young June, who had walked 4 miles to ask for work, carried plates with the balance of a queen and the ambition of a general. Abigail watched them and understood that a table could be more than wood. It could be proof. A year after the fair, Abigail returned to the county grounds. She requested the last stall. The committee man apologized for the placement before realizing she had asked for it. She arrived before sunrise with Elias driving the wagon and June sitting beside the goods, guarding the honey cakes as if they were silver. Hattie and Lenora came in a second wagon. The sign went up clean and black, Mercer and Voss Eating House. Abigail placed the cracked blue plate in the center for a few minutes. Before the crowd arrived, the end of the row looked almost the same as it had the year before. Dust tents. Vendors calling across empty space. A far table waiting to be overlooked. Then people began to come. Not drifting. Not glancing. Coming, a woman asked for $600. A freight driver bought 2 jars of apple butter and said he had ridden early because last year he had arrived too late. Children pressed close to see the plum hand pies. Men who had once crossed the row to avoid her now waited in line and practiced friendly voices. Abigail did not punish them. She had work to do. Near midday, a lull opened. She stood behind the table and looked at the ground in front of her, the place where she had once stood with aching feet, almost no money, and a smile held together by will alone. Elias came beside her. "Same view?" he asked. "No." "Same town." She touched the edge of the blue plate. "Different woman." "I do not think so." She looked at him. "I think she was already there," he said. "Just tired." She watched the line stretch into the fairground and bend toward the noise. She watched the place that had once made her feel discarded become too small to hold what she had built. Maybe Elias was right. Maybe she had not become worthy at all. Maybe worth was not a thing bestowed by customers, husbands, courts, or county fairs. Maybe it was more like a banked coal buried under ash waiting for air. The town had not made her. Silas Crane had not unmade her. Loss had not emptied her. Elias had not rescued her. He had only stopped long enough to see the ember. Abigail Mercer Voss turned back to the table at the end of the row, lifted the cracked blue plate, and served the next person in line. Because there was bread to sell. Because there were women beside her who needed to see what a standing woman looked like. Because some things hold, even cracked, and because the world, slow as it was, had finally caught the scent of what she had been baking in the dark all along.